held a news briefing at the AICC headquarters. It's a lot of drama that's unfolding right now at Chidambaram's residence. Now, that is his residence, the Jorbagh residence, where we're given to understand he has already reached, and now probe team has reached there. And there's a lot of media present. The gate of the residence is locked, as you can see. It's the media, the cameras, the reporters, and even the probe team officials who are outside. And let's see if we can actually get a comment. Okay, and also we're going to try and go across to, one of our reporters to tell you what's happening. But the information that we're getting is that because the gate was not being opened, some of the officials actually scaled the wall, climbed over the wall, and dodged trees to get in. That is the residence of P. Chidambaram. And those are the visuals that we're trying to get to you from while standing outside the gate. Some of those officials, you can see, some of those officials are inside the residence while the gate is still locked. So they have still managed to go inside. High drama unfolding this Wednesday evening, obviously, after P. Chidambaram made that public appearance 24 hours after the High Court verdict yesterday, rejecting his anticipatory bail plea. He was not publicly seen after that. He was in Supreme Court, though, and a picture was released about it. But then only this evening at about 8:15, flanked by senior Congress leaders, P. Chidambaram actually held a news briefing from the Congress headquarters in the national capital, and now the focus has shifted to his residence. Meenakshi Banja joins me with more details. Meenakshi, what's happening right now? Is P. Chidambaram at this residence? We are given to understand that probe team officials are actually scaling walls and jumping over the gate to get inside.
Well, Tanvi, this is prime time, great optics for the CBI. First, they could not trace Mr. Chidambaram despite of him being in Delhi. Now, of course, we saw that alacrity with which team was moved to AICC. And now clearly these dramatic visuals that you are referring to, which our viewers can see on air, of the CBI officials who appear to be in great shape to be scaling the walls since allegedly nobody was opening the main gate. So this is high-octane drama, Tanvi, clearly. And this is all happening because Mr. Chidambaram does not have that umbrella of interim protection from arrest. What the CBI's intention right now is clearly pointing towards imminent arrest. But Tanvi, of course, we saw the officers land up at the residence yesterday. We did not know the purpose at that point in time, whether they want him to just join investigations for the purpose of further questioning or arrest. And Mr. Chidambaram's statement itself just a short while back indicating that he is awaiting the outcome of the Supreme Court's orders. But clearly, the CBI and the ED, this point in time, have different plans.
Yes, and we've got our reporters standing outside that location as well. As you see all this ruckus, I'm not too sure who's climbing the wall now, if these are investigating officials of Enforcement Directorate or the CBI, but they clearly are committed to getting inside and to try and get through P. Chidambaram, though, like we've been telling you, if ED or CBI actually wanted to get through to P. Chidambaram, it wouldn't take them 24 long hours. They wouldn't be so clueless about where India's former Home Minister or Finance Minister is at any given point, especially if they believe he's very, very crucial to their investigation into one of the biggest scams that they are investigating right now. Tushar is joining me right now. Tushar is at that spot. Tushar, what can you tell us? What's happening there?
Yesterday, when the High Court denied the interim protection to P. Chidambaram in the IIF media case, since then, Mr. P. Chidambaram has approached the Supreme Court, but after approaching the Supreme Court, he was untraceable, and even CBI ED had been trying to get him. But since yesterday, after approaching the Supreme Court around 5 p.m. in the evening, he was untraceable. And tonight, when there was a press conference held by his entourage of lawyers, that is Abhishek Manu Singhvi, Kapil Sibal, Vivek Tankha, as well as Salman Khurshid, P. Chidambaram made an entry into the AICC headquarters about an hour and a half back, and he sat down in the press conference and cleared out and justified, saying that he's not involved in any kind of cases that has been registered against him. The ED and CBI have not been able to prove anything in all these cases. There have been no conclusive evidence, and right now a team of CBI has arrived at Chidambaram's residence. He went inside his own residence about 15-20 minutes back, along with Sibal and Abhishek Manu Singhvi. A team of CBI has arrived at his residence to see what further action they will take.
Tushar, this is Avni. This side, if you can just for our viewers who've just joined in, there's been a lot of dramatic developments happening as far as this entire case is concerned. If you can take us through what's been happening at this point in time. Until now, we can see all the visuals on our screens of the teams there who are trying one way or the other to actually get in.
Well, that's right. And a team of CBI officials, around 3 or 4 CBI officials, had arrived at Chidambaram's residence, and they were ringing the bell of Chidambaram's residence, but to no avail. The Chidambaram did not answer the door, so they scaled the walls and entered Chidambaram's residence inside the main gate, and they are now in talks with the guard, who is not allowing the CBI officials to enter the main area of Chidambaram's residence right now. So the CBI officials are currently inside Chidambaram residence, but have not entered the main premises of Chidambaram residence. It is yet to be seen what is going to happen. Either they are going to arrest him, or they are going to again give them a summon, because last night they did give him summon. They stuck the summon notice on his front door and asked him to report to the CBI within 2 hours. There were teams of CBI who had come earlier yesterday and also today morning, but right now the team of CBI, after they got to know that P. Chidambaram had arrived at AICC headquarters and now is back at his residence, a team of CBI has arrived at Mr. P. Chidambaram's residence.
All right, Tushar, thank you so much for getting us those details, the visuals there on your screens of all the drama that's unfolding at this point in time. Remember, just a short while back, Chidambaram made his first public appearance in 24 hours. He made a brief statement, obviously took no questions at that point in time, but it was in fact a show of strength at the press conference, Congress rallying behind Chidambaram. And now, of course, these are the latest updates. The probe team is at Chidambaram's residence, a CBI team outside the ex-finance minister's house at this point, trying to find a way to get in one way or the other. Let's in fact listen in to what he had to say earlier on.
While my lawyers, all senior counsel, were moving the Supreme Court, other lawyers and I worked through the night last night to prepare the papers. We completed the task only this morning and immediately filed the appeals in the Supreme Court. I was working alongside my lawyers the whole of last night. Today, throughout the day, I was with my lawyers following the proceedings in the Supreme Court. I was aghast that I was accused of hiding from the law. On the contrary, I was seeking the protection of the law. I was accused of running away from justice. On the contrary, I was engaged in the pursuit of justice. My lawyers have told me that despite their impassioned pleas, the cases were not listed for hearing today, nor will they be listed tomorrow, but will be listed only on Friday. I bow down to the orders of the Honorable Supreme Court. Between now and Friday, I shall walk with a clear conscience and my head held high. I shall respect the law, even if it is applied with an unequal hand by the investigating agencies. In the name of freedom, I can only hope and pray that the investigating agencies will also respect the law.
Well, that, of course, was what P. Chidambaram had to say just a short while back. But we're going to continue tracking all those developments as and when they happen. There have been a lot of dramatic developments through the last few hours, and we'll continue to track them. Well, good evening. You're watching the Urban Debate. I'm Avni Raja. Our economy is in pain. The economic crisis is deepening. It's no longer only about people not buying houses or cars or bikes. Things have become so grim that consumers are even thinking twice about buying 5 rupees biscuit packets. People have even reduced their consumption of soaps, shampoos, innerwear. And these are all things that you usually don't expect people to stop buying. Let's look at an example. India's largest biscuit maker, Parle Products, today said that they may have no choice but to lay off 10% of their employees. That's 10,000 people who may end up losing their jobs if the government doesn't step in. The management has said that demand has slowed down both in rural and urban areas. Now, this comes after Britannia's managing director also talked about the slowdown, saying that if a consumer is thinking twice about buying a 5 rupee product, then there is some serious issue in the economy. The question at this point is, how deep is the downturn? Is the slowdown just part of the ups and downs of an economy, what is known as a cyclical slowdown, or is there something much more fundamental at play here? When will we see concrete words in action that will give us the confidence that those governing the country are in control of the situation and doing all they can to turn things around? That's the big question that we'll be asking today. But before I introduce my guests, let's listen into what Mayank Shah, category head of Parle Products, had to say on this issue.
We have been talking about it to government, saying that, this is not right, because biscuits below 100 rupees per kg were actually exempted from excise in the earlier tax regime. The principle of allocating a particular GST slab was, of a revenue neutral rate. So by that logic, it should not be subjected to 18% GST and clubbed with other premium biscuits, which are at 200, 300, 400 rupees per kg. So we anticipated that, if you are subjecting it to higher GST, there would be a price hike which would have an impact on demand. Now, while we were very hopeful and very optimistic about government reducing the GST, and we waited for almost like more than 1.5 years, that did not happen. And we were forced to take a price hike. So as a result of price hike, these are very price sensitive categories. As a result of price hike, there was a dip in demand, and what aggravated was the slowdown in economy. So both the things put together has further aggravated the situation.
All right, let's in fact introduce the panel of guests who are with me today. Jagdish Khattar, founder of Carnation Autos; Ajay Bagga, market expert; Viren Shah, president of Federation of Retail Traders Welfare Association; Mohan Guruswamy, senior economist; Professor Arun Kumar, chair, Professor, Institute of Social Sciences; Professor Aman Agarwal, director, Indian Institute of Finance. Thank you all of you so much for joining in. This extremely important issue, and we're seeing the extent of how deep the slowdown really is. Let me start with Jagdish Khattar. Let's first understand what the impact is really on industries at the micro level before we get to the macros. Jagdish Khattar, if you can take us through what the situation is on ground. We of course know how the auto numbers have been over the last few months, how it was last month as well, but give us your perspective.
As you mentioned, I think the problem is far wider than automobiles, and it's time that we realize that we are in a crisis situation. We can keep on talking about 10%, 7%, 5%, that may be today as compared to a higher figure a few months earlier. But it appears that as we go along, things will not improve anymore. So my request and suggestion would be that why this happened, etc., we could keep that aside, because we lose a lot of time in that, and let us all accept that we have a crisis on our hand, and it needs to be tackled by everyone together, without giving any, blaming anyone for it, because that's not going to solve the problem. So the problem is across most of the sectors. I think there is some people are uncertain about the jobs that they are having. They are uncertain about what the government is. Of course, the government is saying that some package will come soon. If a package comes, will that solve the problems? I think everyone has to be ready to play their role in it. So I don't want to take much of your time, except to say that we are in a crisis which has developed over a period of time, and cumulatively we are faced with it. We all need to sit down together and forget every other differences between us. There is no point blaming each other or who has done, why it has done. We are in a problem, we are in a crisis, and we need to meet that together. You have experts, they have solutions, and let us all think on same lines as far as possible.
Right, absolutely. Virensha, let me come to you next. I mean, of course, we know that we've been talking about how people are not going out there and buying houses and people are not buying cars and two-wheelers. But now, obviously, the situation has gotten much worse with people not even buying things like biscuits and innerwear. All across the board, we are seeing a slowdown. Take us through your perspective.
I mean, whatever you see is there on your screen. If the biscuit sales are down, and people at Parle, 10,000 people have been jobless. So you can understand what is the scenario in India. This itself shows the basic food where this buying is less. So you can imagine there is nowhere else like housing, clothing, everywhere, all the businesses are affected as on today. People do not have any cash with them to save. Those people who have the job, they cannot give that kind of a salary they are paying for all these years. This year, the increment they have not given. Forget about increment. A lot of business houses, a lot of shops, they have not paid the salary for 2 months and 3 months and sometimes even 6 months. Salaries are not paid. People are losing job. Businesses are dying. There are a lot of shops are shutting down. People are actually giving their shop on rent. Even the rent on the shop, it's come down by 30 to 40%. Those times are gone where there was a demand. New shops were opening. Right now is a time where people cannot be able to achieve the result what they've been achieving since last 5 years or 7 years before. Things are gradually going down, and as on today the scenario is such, more than 35 to 40% business down. The overheads and the turnover, it's both have come to the standstill right now, and the overheads are going high. People cannot be paid salary. So scenario at the grassroots level is very, very sad. Of course, there are other business houses are also getting affected. So you see the overall picture. It's Indian business
Right.
are dying. Maybe it could be a demonetization is the biggest factor which I can think of as on today. But otherwise, all over the world, business is slow. So maybe that is another effect.
All right, Ajay Baga, let me bring you in here. You know, from your perspective, we know, of course, as far as the stock markets are concerned, they've been extremely volatile. People have been, in fact, we've been getting a lot of questions about people asking whether or not to withdraw from mutual funds, what to do with their money. And of course, on the other hand, we are hearing things from the finance ministry about possible, rollback of things like a long-term capital gains tax after 3 years. In your perspective, will something like that actually help? Is that purely going to, is a change in sentiment really going to help turn things around?
Yeah, Avni, today two good things happened. I would, proceed on the lines of our senior Mr. Khattar, the way he spoke about solutions, because analysis we'll keep on doing. There is no end to it.
Yes.
What is the way ahead now? I think RBI has done its bit on the monetary side. It has provided liquidity. Today we are liquid about 2 lakh crores in the money markets on a daily basis. It has cut rates 4 times. Today the RBI minutes came out, the RBI last monetary policy committee minutes, and all the 6 committee members were unanimous that there is a slowdown and fiscal has to now step up. So we need more reforms. We need a stronger stimulus from the fiscal. The second good thing was Piyush Goyal was in town, the Commerce Minister, and addressing various fora. He was clear that there is discussion on for a stimulus and you can expect a stimulus in the very short term. So over the next few weeks, I think you will see some kind of a stimulus. What will take us out of this downturn? You need a very coordinated, very convergent action just like 2008. 2-3 measures that have to be taken. This is not the time to be fiscally very austere. We have to let go on the fiscal deficit target and pump prime the economy. That can happen 2 ways. One is through creating some infrastructure, creating some jobs. That will create a positive multiplier. Second is on the consumption side by tax cuts, immediately helping put more money in people's pockets so that they consume more and the economy gains traction. I think fiscal stimulus is, in short, what we have to look forward to.
Absolutely, and that's a very key point as to whether or not the government will be willing to let go of its fiscal target and whether or not that's the only solution. But we'll get to that in just a bit. Let's get in our other voices as well. Mohan Guruswamy, coming to you, your perspective at this point in time, considering that, you know, we were a few weeks ago, we were talking about a slowdown in real estate, slowdown in auto industry. Now we are coming down to a slowdown in things that you usually don't expect people to reduce buying.
Well, you know, we have our economy, the slowdown has very little to do with externalities. You know, our economy is not particularly integrated with the global economy. So the global buffeting, which helped us in 2008, which we were insulated, also applies even now. What is happening is the internal situation has become terrible. And it's a direct consequence of demonetization, where you sucked out huge amounts of cash, rendered huge number of people jobless, shut down lots of industries, and the consequences are still being felt. And the government hasn't woken up to this. The trends have been very clear. All indicators have been very clear for the last 8 or 9 months. Car sales, all these indicators, motorbike sales, tractor sales, consumption of FMCG, all have been reported for the last 8 months, and the government hasn't woken up. And even now they haven't announced a package. The only thing we got was a 0.35% rate cut announced by the RBI, and we're not even sure whether the banks will pass that on to the customers. I think you need drastic solutions, you need a huge pump prime, you need a huge jump start to get the economy growing, and that, it seems, the government is short of ideas on what to do. Because that is why nothing is coming out of the big black box, and they're sitting and holding meetings after meetings. And I think time is running out very fast. At this stage of biscuit sales, you know, I used to work in a biscuit company many years ago. The major consumers of the glucose biscuits were workers and school children. You know, at that level, it's really gone, and lower income. And at that level, it's gone down. That means how badly they... So, you know, car sales, we're all talking about pump priming car sales, but how do you pump prime the industry which is the people who are right at the bottom?
Yes.
You know, who don't have jobs.
Yes, absolutely.
Who don't have hopes.
Yes, absolutely.
You want to do something there first.
Yes, absolutely. Obviously, it's all a reflection of how people are feeling, and the fact that sentiment at this point in time is extremely low, and people are extremely insecure about things like jobs, which is also the key thing that has to be addressed. But Professor Aman Agarwal, bringing you in here, what is your opening comments?
You see, I think the government would need to take all the 3 measures together. One is on the monetary front, they started doing a little bit about it. The second is on the fiscal front, and the third is about the administrative reforms structure as well. There is a lot of administrative hindrance which is actually causing a lot of pain to the economy as of today. You see, if you look at, I have already talked before also, not only in cars, but even when you look at small vendors in a city like Delhi, when you are shutting down illegal use of premises which have been happening for the good 30, 40, 50 years. Why have been development authorities sleeping over it, and suddenly one day they wake up and they are now shutting down everything which is happening? Now please tell me, with small vendor which is actually working there, how will he is going to make his livelihood go forward on the name of trying to create a good environment or a better environment? In one day you can't change the whole world, and I think that is where the administrative reforms, the way administration is working as of today, is actually creating a chaos and a problem. Apart from that, the fiscal measures which are there, I think already some of us have suggested, but then we need to keep in mind that the fiscal spending needs to be in a productive manner. It needs to be something which is going to induce, and empower things to go forward, and not basically distribute subsidies or distribute largesse to large communities and which will be of wasteful expenditure. In monetary front, they can still do much further because the RBI cut, is not really getting transferred to the people at large, whether it is in terms of loans. But what the RBI needs to look at today is creating liquidity, creating jobs. 13 or 14 banks were under PCA for almost about a year and a half, 2 years before Shaktikant Das took over. Now they can actually ask the banks to go about opening up branches, going to rural areas, doing agriculture financing, doing a lot of other things which are needed in the country. And I think that would certainly spur growth because the banks have not expanded themselves in the last 2.5 years. Now the focus has to be growth through jobs.
Right.
And jobs need to be created, whether it is through the private sector, through the other, because if jobs are there, people will have money in their hands. If people have money in their hands, they don't mind paying taxes. One thing which is very interesting raised in the Parle-G case is about GST.
Yes.
And I think in terms of fiscal prudence, they need to regularize and make it more homogeneous. Plus, they need to also see that petrol and diesel, which has been kept out of the GST framework, comes in, because look at the fact that as of today, almost about 55 to 65% of the petrol or diesel prices is nothing else but state taxes. That is going to get reduced to immediately to about, even if we take the highest bracket, to about 28%. So we are going to immediately cut down the cost to the end consumer, whether it is vegetables, whether it is products and other things. That needs to be immediately done. It's been almost about 2 years now. They have been talking about it, but nothing has been done. The states have been given a levy. They should actually go about doing it so that will help at least reduce the cost to the producer, and they will be able to surface at least some component. But keep the fact that liquidity is a big problem. The way of life in India, which has been going on with the parallel economy, is not going to be there tomorrow, and we are not looking at those kind of NPAs which have been sponsoring growth in this country going forward as well.
Right, absolutely. In fact, let's also get in Professor Arun Kumar as well. Your perspective, Professor Kumar, because one part, like we've been hearing our panelists also talk about, is creation of jobs, but the other part is also, the way people feel about having jobs even now, because there is so much of insecurity. Nobody knows if their jobs are going to get cut. You have people like Parle coming out and saying we may have no choice but to cut 10,000 jobs. So there is a lot of insecurity among people, which obviously then leads to spending as less as possible.
So you are absolutely right that employment has been a major problem. But let me begin from the fact that there is a structural problem in the economy, and that's why, in spite of the RBI cutting interest rates and the stock market being at a high in the last 6-8 months, investment is not reviving in the private sector, and that's because capacity utilization, as per the RBI data, has been below 75%, and probably falling after the RBI data was released about 6 months back. So as long as capacity utilization is low, investment does not revive. And as you can see in automobile sector, FMCG sector, and various other sectors, the factories are closing down for a week, 10 days, etc., which suggests that capacity utilization is going down further. Now, where does this problem begin? The structural problem began, with demonetization, because we have a very large unorganized sector which employs 94% of the workforce and produces 45% of the output. And demonetization hit this unorganized sector very hard. People lost their jobs and went back to rural areas. So MGNREGS demand shot up, showing that people were losing jobs. Secondly, the credit offtake in November 2016 was at the lowest point in 60 years, and in July 2017 it became negative to industry, which had never happened before, showing that output was declining and employment was declining. So in a sense, first we had the shock of the demonetization, which hit the unorganized sector and employment went down. Then came the shock of GST, and GST has shocked the unorganized sector first, and then also the organized sector. We've had more than 1,000 changes. There's been a huge confusion around GST, and there's a structural problem there, that even though unorganized sector is exempt from GST, but what has happened is that the unorganized sector doesn't get input credit, cannot give input credit, and there's the reverse charge mechanism which has not yet been implemented, but that's hanging fire. So in other words, the unorganized sector, in spite of being exempted from GST, actually suffered further, and the organized sector also suffered. and then we had the NPA crisis continuing on, and the NBFC crisis added to that. So these three big shocks to the economy have meant that unemployment declined. When unemployment declines, then the agriculture demand goes down and food prices decline. So there's a deflation in food prices, and farmers' income suffered, and farmers went into a crisis. So you had the unemployment crisis and the farmers' crisis, and both of them in the unorganized sector, which meant demand went down. And when demand went down, it finally started affecting the organized sector in the last 1 year.
Right.
So that we've seen the rate of growth fall from 8% to 5.8% officially, but it's fallen even further. And because of this unemployment increasing and demand going down, therefore capacity utilization has been low. And that's why my argument is that we have to create a stimulus through creating jobs. You know, fiscal deficit cannot be raised very much at this point of time, because if you take the center's fiscal deficit, state's fiscal deficit, and what the center has done to the public sector units by putting the fiscal deficit on them, the fiscal deficit is close to 8 to 9%. And therefore, there's not much scope for the fiscal deficit to be raised. But what can be done is employment can be raised through investment in education and health, which are employment-generating sectors, and in rural infrastructure. So we need a stimulus for the unorganized sector, even more than a stimulus for the organized sector. But unfortunately, the voice of the unorganized sector is very weak, and therefore people don't talk about the unorganized sector stimulus. People talk about the organized sector stimulus. And I don't think GST rates can be cut very sharply. For instance, petroleum goods cannot be really brought into GST, because then the revenue of government, which is already short on GST by about 1 lakh crores, that will fall even further if you cut the GST, the tax rates on petroleum goods.
Yes, absolutely, Professor Kumar. If I can just interrupt you there, we'll get into the specifics, but just to sort of, summarize so far what we've heard from the government at this point in time, we've seen that meetings have been held by the finance minister across different industries to find out what really can be done. We've heard about a stimulus package that will perhaps be announced sometime soon, but we have no idea about what it really is going to entail. We know that a draft DTC code has been, a direct tax code has been submitted, which will overhaul the entire tax system. But again, we don't know what exactly is in that draft code and when and it will be implemented. And we've heard about small other measures, like perhaps a rollback of a long-term capital gains tax after 3 years. So that's really so far what we've heard from the government, which is, in my opinion, at this point in time, nothing concrete at all. We don't know what the government is thinking, how it is going to act in this entire issue. Meanwhile, like we've also heard, as far as the demands from various industries are concerned, there is the demands from the auto industry to cut GST, demands from the consumer goods industry to cut GST, like for the biscuits, below a certain price, and of course there's the real estate industry. So all of these demands are there to cut taxes, to provide stimulus, and then of course there is the entire fiscal balance that the government also has to maintain. So Ajay Baga, coming to you here, there is this opinion, like you also pointed out, that government should perhaps just increase spending and not think so much about fiscal at this point in time. Is really that the solution for the government and can the government afford to do that?
Well, we did that in 2008. We took the fiscal to more than 6.5%, and that helped to make sure that the Indian economy did not go down the way of the global economy. So that is the shortcut, if you ask me. The other measures are very structural. So what has been happening is we have been taking a lot of concentrated bitter medicine altogether without any safety net. So what we really need is continue the reforms, whatever reforms are happening, the redistributive justice, that is good, but you need to give some relief to at least certain sectors which are very high on employment, like textiles, like construction, like real estate, like automobile, which has a lot of employment around the economy. We are not asking to give a package to IT or pharma, for example. Their margins are protected and they are outside looking, external focused sectors. They're doing well. What we need is the internal consumption in India, and there you don't have any easy solution. The monetary policy has done a lot already. Maybe they can cut rates again by about 50 basis points over the next 3 to 4 months. but their arsenal is largely exhausted. You have to fall back on fiscal, pump prime the economy, and that is twin. One is increase the expenditure on infrastructure, bring in a package for certain sectors which are in deep trouble and which can generate a lot of employment, and third, give something back to the consuming classes. The other thing, Avni, is that our rural wages have really stagnated. Last 4 years, the rural wages have been growing at about 3% per annum because the MSP was held very tight. So that has meant a transfer of wealth from rural India into urban India. We as consumers have got food at very cheap prices, but the farmer has not been able to make ends meet. You have to bring in a package for the farmer distress, and all that has to be at a cost. We can take a call that yes, we will skip our fiscal FRBM targets for the next 2 years because we need to jumpstart the economy. It's like a patient is in a heart failure mode and you have to give them that electric therapy to kickstart the heart again. That's where we have reached.
Yes, absolutely. And Mohan Guruswamy, let me come to you here. The fact that, like again, Ajay Baga was just pointing out that RBI has done all it can. It has reduced rates so much, but we obviously haven't seen that transmission happening from the banks in terms of lower rates. Does that really indicate, isn't that a big indicator of the fact that this could be a much deeper slowdown, much a more structural slowdown? And if that is in fact the case, then RBI cutting rates is really not going to help. In fact, that is an observation that one of the Monetary Policy Committee members made as far as the minutes are concerned, saying that monetary policy has limitations with respect to impacting structural factors, and reforms is what is really going to help come out of this.
Absolutely. The RBI doesn't, its reach does not extend very much beyond the cities and towns of India. What is happening in the countryside is that you have a huge build-up of unemployment, you have a huge build-up of depression, and you have a huge build-up of people looking to the government for succor, and the government is not able to provide. Now Ajay Baga just spoke about raising MSP prices, but MSP prices only benefit people in a few states and a few regions and farmers with surpluses. How do you help farmers who have nothing? How do you help landless labor? So the best way to get them off is to get them back into the construction industry. Demonetization broke the back of construction industry, and you've got to get people back to work and put money in building infrastructure, building roads, and where people can get day-to-day jobs to revive the economy. That's where your biscuit sales and all these will start picking up. Textiles and all that will start picking up. And then it'll percolate upwards. This percolation downwards is not going to work anymore because at some level the percolation just stops. You're going to push it upwards, and for this you need to revise your thinking. The usual way of timpering with interest rates and things that are not going to work anymore. You've got to put lots of money down there to create new infrastructure, new construction, jobs for people without many skills. For that, it's going to take money. So question is, government should focus on getting money. Beg, borrow, steal, I say, at this moment. And there is money. There is money within the system. There is money outside the system. The government should work on a walk footing to get that money and make funds available for industries, for business people to borrow, to take, and to invest, and for the government to invest in basic industries and infrastructure.
Yes. Yes, in fact, Professor Agarwal, if I can come to you here, while we're talking about a lot of the entire way to the solutions to deal with this, the macros, the question really is that what is your sense from what the government has said so far, from the actions, from the words? Because I don't believe that it's so far given confidence at all to people to say that, here is a government who's going to make sure that we don't lose jobs, who's going to make sure that we will have jobs tomorrow, that we will have money in hand and we will be taken care of.
I agree with you. The thing is that the very fact that the Prime Minister has raised this issue and he's looking on to this, is certainly a serious concern which has been going and it has spread a wave to the different ministries that it is supposed to be taken seriously. And I think that is something which is very critical, because he as a Prime Minister is not seen quite leniently, he is seen quite strict, and he likes to take things forward. From that perspective, I think that has given a little bit of a wave to the industry. But the important factor which still remains is the fact that the industry is suffering on account of lack of liquidity, which they have been flushed with in the past. They are suffering on account of excessive regulations which are there by the different kind of regulators, and bringing out draconian laws like 10-year car life, 15-year car life, which is not there anywhere in the world. And in a country where car is supposed to be a lifelong asset and not a product like a pen or a pencil. Now that's where you need to go about regularizing things, and fortunately there has been some sense which is put forward, but we still have not seen much. I incidentally tried to talk after this RBI rate cut to large number of banks, trying to see what does they feel, or what kind of home loans, what are the rates, and you will be surprised there is no difference except for the SBI, which has come out with an advertisement which is going to reduce the rates from the 1st of September. There is no bank in the country which has actually reduced a single cent of a rate. And if you see, they do not transfer these kind of benefits, how are things going to happen? In fact, today I wanted to do an NEFT, and I said that there are supposed to be no charges, and I was surprised to see that the bank is still levying charges on NEFT transactions, whereas in June 2019 it came out in front page in newspapers that the RBI has made out circular that there will be no charges. So there is a disconnect between RBI and the banks, and ultimately with the industry. One thing is very clear with this government, and I think which should be taken.
Yes, there is in fact a big disconnect.
One thing I like to say is very clear with this government is that there was a way of life of creating NPAs, taking loans, not repaying them, and then going forward with it. And that's how the large part of the industry was sponsoring itself. About 5 lakh crores of waiver was the absorption capacity of the Indian economy in the last 17-18 years. Every year about 4.5 to 5 lakh crores was being waived by different governments which have been coming to power. That has been put to largely to a stop. Only about 2.5 crores is being waived now. Now that has given a big shock to a large part of the industrial community, which actually had been surviving on waivers coming through banks, waivers going on whether it is in agriculture. Almost about 2.5 lakh crores waivers were being given to the agriculturists for the amount of loans given to them. About 1 lakh crore on an annual basis was being given to the industry of hundreds and thousands of crores.
Yes, absolutely, Aman Agarwal. A point taken there. Of course, banks are dealing with their own issues at this point in time. Banks are dealing with their own issues of NPAs, and they are unable to pass on the rate cut despite everybody from the Prime Minister himself to the Finance Minister to the RBI trying to tell them to reduce the rates. But of course, we'll have to wait and see how and when that really starts translating, and how much that's really going to help in reviving the economy, or at least playing a part in reviving the economy. But I want to go back to Jagdish Khattar of Carnation Autos, because Jagdish Khattar, the RBI governor again in the minutes that were released today has very clearly said that 2 key indicators of rural demand, tractor and motorcycle sales, continue to contract. Of course, so there is one line of thinking that can say that, okay, car sales can be cyclical. It can be called a discretionary expense. People may be choosing not to buy cars. But when you have things like tractors, when you have things like two-wheelers, sort of demand for that sort of contracting, that is a real indication of the rural economy as well.
Let's all agree that we have a crisis on our hand, and that crisis is in all segments. So my first request would be that A, let us all accept that there is a crisis. Let us also accept that all of us need to work together on this. My policy has been that if all of us agree that there is a crisis and we work together, I think 50% of the problem is solved. So we have a crisis in the rural area, in the urban area, etc. Can at the government and political level, I mean, my feeling is, and I have seen few crises in my life, we have not seen a thing like this in the past. And things are going to get worse if we don't do anything. So at the political level, can they all get together and recognize that there is a crisis? And in this, no one will be a winner. I think that's very important. If we play ducks and drakes, we are not going to be winners, and our public is going to last. Solutions are there, all others are there, but we have to work in tandem. So coming back, it's not only rural, urban, and all areas are there. All our political parties and administration need to come together. Let us decide that for a year and a half, we'll work as a team and work purely on merits and not play politics. Once that atmosphere is created, I mean, solutions are there. Only thing is, things have slipped. We have gone back and forth and everything.
Right.
When we all come first on a same platform that we work together, we have not seen a crisis like this.
Yes.
And then we start solving. You know, there are options 1, option 2, option 3. These can be discussed as long as there is willingness and unity in seeing that this is the worst that we are facing and we need to get out of it.
Right, absolutely. All right. In fact, Professor Arun Kumar, coming to you now, I want to just understand your perspective. There is a lot of comparison being done to, of course, the situation as it was in 2008. But, of course, that situation was completely different because that was obviously led by global events that had a ripple effect. But from the perspective of, what really happened, the impact of that and the impact today that we are facing, even though it's all more internal, how do you see the comparison in terms of the demand, in terms of the way people are reacting, in terms of the consumer sentiment and how people are feeling at this point in time?
So, the 2007-8 crisis, the Indian economy was doing rather well, and it was struck by the global factors. But what the government did was it generated demand by pumping purchasing power into the rural areas. For instance, the loan waiver of 70,000 crores, the start of the MGNREGS scheme, the midday meal scheme, etc. Roughly 2 lakh crores were pumped into the economy, and the tax rate, excise duty, etc. was reduced so as to increase demand for various goods. So the Indian economy, instead of having a negative rate of growth, continued to be at about 5% rate of growth at that point of time. But today the situation is different because the internal economy is very weak. It's not strong like it was at that time when it was growing at 8.5%, 9%. So already the internal situation is so weak that there's very little leeway. As I said, the fiscal deficit, which at that point of time had been cut to 3% or thereabouts, is already at about 8 to 9% if you include the state's fiscal deficit, the public sector's fiscal deficit, and the center's fiscal deficit. Right. So the fiscal deficit is already very high, and therefore the leeway in terms of increasing fiscal deficit is not that high. And because the GST collections are low, you cannot cut back further on the GST rates or bring in petroleum goods into the situation, because as happened last year, we were short of revenue by about 1.6 lakh crores last year. And if you cut back now, you'll be short further, and therefore there'll be a further problem that would arise at this point of time. So I think what needs to be done is we need a package for the unorganized sector. The unorganized sector package is what is missing. We all talk about the package for the organized sector, organized construction, organized automobile sector, organized, etc. But it's the unorganized sector, and we need to generate employment at a very large level. We have to see which are the employment generating sectors. The organized sector employs only 6% of the workforce, so that cannot expand very fast. It's in the unorganized sector that we need to pump in demand.
Yes.
And that's where we need to refocus our demand generation into rural areas by going in for rural infrastructure. Education, where we have never crossed 3.8% on public education, we need to go to at least 6%. In health, we need to go to at least 3%. We have never crossed 1.3%. And these are areas that will generate substantial amount of employment.
Right.
So if we generate a lot of employment, demand will begin to kick in. And that is where I think we need to really focus. The unorganized sector is very key, because that is where the problem began with. The problem did not begin with the organized sector. So
yes, absolutely. Point taken, Professor. At this point in time, Professor Kumar, point taken. And I do agree with you that it is, of course, unorganized sector is an area that needs a lot of focus. But at the same time, we must also remember that organized sectors, for example, the auto industry, the ripple effect of the auto industry slowdown also comes onto the unorganized sector. So if you provide a stimulus for an organized sector, automatically the repercussions of that does in fact flow down to the unorganized sector, which is at this point even the nuts and bolts of the companies of the small industry.